This is Scott Downey. To many of you in the Backyard Bend, this may not ring a bell as he has spent his most recent years living in Eugene. Scott is 58 years old and is an original member of the Pepsi skateboard demo team from the 1970s. Scott is also an original Sims Snowboards team rider. He spent many of his years here in Bend, helping shape the snowboard industry as we know it today. I caught up with him in Eugene to talk about one of his biggest accomplishments. Before we get into Scott Downey's interview, I gotta throw some high fives to Mother's Juice Bar and Cafe. They have been supporting our community and Backyard Bend with raw, organic, nutritional energy since way before it was cool. So Scott has been skateboarding for a long time.
1974.
And this truck that you have here, I love this piece of art. What exactly, what's the history behind this skateboard
that's
truck?
actually from doing slappies before they were called slappies. And a friend of mine, Pete Meredith, and myself were on the Pepsi Cola skateboard team, and we were up in, I think it was Connecticut or Rhode Island, somewhere up in there. And after we do demos, at the end of the day, we go back to the hotel and we would find a curb and we would just grind the shit out of our trucks. And this truck, I ground it all the way through where you can actually turn the aluminum part here. That's kind of interesting. So I would do so many slappies with that truck that the axle would actually bend. And I have to get off the board, bend it back, do a couple more slappies, and then do that process over and over to get it ground down halfway through the axle.
The snowboard boot and the snowboard binding that you know today, it has not always been this easy. And before Burton ever was making snowboard boots, Scott Downey actually was the first person to move us away from the Sorel, like the classic Sorel snow boot wrapped with duct tape. He actually called Sorel and said, hey, everybody's using your snow boots for snowboarding, but we can do this better. Scott invented essentially the first purpose-built snowboard boot. So we're gonna actually go look at the history and the development of that right now behind me.
Okay. All right, so this is the original boot that I made. Sean Farmer and I used to sit around and make boots all night because our feet would hurt so bad. And so what I did was I took a coal flak bottom, and I took a Sorel top, your classic Caribou Sorel top, and I pop riveted and shoe glued it to the bottom of the coal flak. So you'd have a hard bottom and a soft top where you could still tweak, and because tweaking was a big deal back then, not so much like today, but laying your knee down was a big deal back then. So that's why we made a hard bottom and a soft top. The hard bottom would protect your foot, and the soft top would let you tweak. And so I made a couple of prototypes. I went to Sorel. They sent me home with a box of leather and clips and clasps and all kinds of stuff like that. And I brought it to a shoemaker. I cut it all up, brought it to a shoemaker. We had him stitch it together, and I made two prototypes. This is one of the other ones, had some Velcro, hard toe area, and then the bottom part was an original, a Champion. This is what, like Sean Palmer, Terry Kidwell, and all those guys rode the Champion model Sorel snowboard boot back in the day. So after I made those prototypes, I brought them back to Sorel and had a big meeting, talked about it, signed contracts, and then we came up with these two prototypes, and these were tested at a place called Sleepy Dunes Sand. It's like the Sand Hills, and it was in Michigan. And we tested these prototype boots. They finally went to production, and we came out with what's the first signature model snowboard boot.
This is the one that I saw in Bend, and then you brought this to Bend, to Mount Bachelor.
Yeah, this eventually made its way to Bend. I mean, but it was out even before. I think these came out in '87, and it's the original, the Scott Downey Pro model. And it was the first signature model snowboard boot. And then we have some other models that came out. I don't remember all what they are, but you can tell it was, back in the 80s, the colors were explosive to say the least, And of course, you know, this is back then it was really cool. Then of course it's not cool anymore. And now just, I mean, it's cool because it's so obnoxious, you know. So that's why I like this. Was probably my favorite one. But eventually this whole progression as we're working down here, you can see we came out with some other Velcro ones and some straps we tried, and then we shortened the toe box up in here to make more of a new kind of new school sort of looking boot. This is when low back high backs were in.
Yeah,
this is where people were cutting the high backs and cutting the noses off their boards with jigsaws and all that. This is when this started to come out, this kind of stuff. It eventually worked its way to one we called the Stunt Man, and Sean Farmer actually came up with that name for me because, you know, he's a stunt man. So, and here's the boot called the Stunt Man, and inside it had a plastic ankle support, and this was taken from the idea of pro football, basketball players. They wear this similar thing to this underneath their sneakers.
You heard it here first, right here in Oregon. Scott Downey, helping develop snowboard boots as we know them today, along with bindings, and as well just being a curator of modern snowboarding, and since way before it was cool. And Backyard Bend, now you know. Now you know. Scott,
right. Yep.
Thank you.
Good hanging with you, JMO. Good to see you again.